Well, welcome everybody to our three sessions talking about lab planning. First, a little brief introduction. I'm Bob Soderstrom. I'm with Svigals and Partners. I'm one of the lab planners here. Been here for 33 years, and it's been fun to watch the biotech community evolve over the years. And excited about this three panel series that we've outlined. Welcome to choosing the best location for your laboratory facility, the first of our three panel series. The second one will be session 2, will be designing your lab for maximum ROI. That's on October 12th. And then the last one is lab space life cycle and lessons learned, and that's on October 26th. New Haven is one of the only handful of markets booming in sci-tech right now, and these discussions were designed to be helpful and address all steps from selecting lab location to designing to moving in. Our moderator today is Jon Hocevar, and I'm excited to have her lead this off. I think she's the perfect person to get this panel session, these three sessions going. Dawn is the president and CEO of BioCT, dedicated to the growth of Connecticut's bioscience industry, contributing author in the development of the state's 10-year strategic plan to guide investment in bioscience industry. She serves on Connecticut Economic Advisory Committee. She serves on the Southern Connecticut State Biopath Advisory Board, and Dawn recently joined the Cellular and Molecular Biology Graduate Program Advisory Board at the University of New Haven. Dawn is a board member at BioSurplus and an equipment asset management company. And so, Dawn, thank you for moderating this session.
Thank you very much, Bob. Appreciate that. So yes, thank you all for coming to this, the initial panel, choosing the best facility and location for your laboratory needs. This infrastructure series is a partnership between BioCT and one of Connecticut's leading laboratory architectural firms, Svigals and Partners. They've done a tremendous amount of work with the labs that are being built in the New Haven area and all over. Before we get started, I'd like to share a little bit of housekeeping. Please use the chat button at the bottom of your screen for any questions that you may have for the panelists. We will leave time at the end of the panel discussion for your questions. So let's get started. So if you're starting a lab, you're thinking about getting a lab going, you're already in the industry, what type of space is best suited for you and where should it be located? Today's panelists represent different types of incubator spaces in Connecticut and have over 15 plus years of experience in operating labs. On the panel is Eric Linsley, who is the general managing partner of BioLabs, coming into New Haven. Kim Kelly is the director of BioCT Innovation Commons Incubator in Groton, and she will be managing the Pierce New Haven Innovation Labs Incubator as well. Paul Parker is the director of Technology Incubation Program, better known as TIP at UCONN. And Jon Soderstrom is the managing director of the Yale Technology Commercialization Office, known as OCR, over the last 25 years. So I'd like to ask the panelists to just take a minute and introduce yourselves a little bit more, and then we'll get into the questions. So Kim, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I started out my career as CRO in Texas, and I decided to move back to Connecticut, where I lived most of my life. Then I was at a startup in New Haven for 13 years. And I started at BioCT to develop and manage the incubator out in Groton a little over 7 years ago. Since then, we've been managing the incubator out in Groton. And that incubator, companies at the incubator have raised over $150 million in venture funds. Now we are managing partners with Pierce and developing a lab space in New Haven, which will be open in November. And we're excited to help bring more space to the New Haven area.
Thank you, Kim. Paul.
Yes, my background is basically I was in finance for a long time, probably 25 plus years in major corporations, Fortune 100, all the way down to startups. Before I joined TIP, I was the CFO for 4 startups. 3 of them were successful, 1 wasn't. And then once I joined TIP, it's been, for the last 8 years, it's been quite the ride to see it grow from where it started in 2003 to when I joined 8 years ago to where it is now.
Thank you. John.
Well, until a few months ago, I was the managing director of the Office of Cooperative Research. And over the last, let's just keep it current. Over the last decade, we've launched probably 50 to 60 biotech startups. Most of them started in New Haven and stayed. The one thing that we're very proud of is if they started in New Haven, they stayed in New Haven. The one thing we're not proud of is if they started outside of New Haven, we haven't been able to attract them back. But those companies collectively have raised about $1 billion, probably north of $1 billion in professional venture capital over those years. And we've had a string of IPOs, I think 5 in the last 5 years, which is not a bad track record. But as I was telling everybody earlier, what we are seeing in the proverbial hockey stick is a change that is accelerating, and where we were averaging 5 to 6 startups a year, venture-backed startups a year, we are now averaging over 10 venture-backed startups a year. And this year alone, we've already, what are we in September? We've already closed on 11 that have raised 160 million in professional venture capital. So just this calendar year.
That's excellent, John. And I look forward to getting into that more in a few minutes. Eric, I don't see you, but I know you're there.
I'm here. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me this morning. My name is Eric Linsley. I'm the co-founder of BioLabs LLC and the co-founder of BioLabs North Carolina. We are a national chain of co-working spaces focused on wet lab companies. We have 16 labs across the country in 7 different cities. In total, the network supports about 385 companies as of this morning, growing rapidly. Most recently, we announced bringing a new BioLab location to New Haven, working with Yale and Carter Winstanley at 101 College. That will be online, we hope, in early 2024. We're very excited about that. We're very excited about the success that we've seen with these co-working models outside of Cambridge, and the success we've had in North Carolina is quite telling. It's really informed us about the possibility that John was just describing in New Haven for BioLab footprint there. And for me personally, I'm very excited about this because I grew up on the coast in Guilford, Connecticut. So for me, I'm a little bit of the prodigal son returning home, and I'm really looking forward to working with you all and the ecosystem to bring BioLab CT out of the ground in New Haven. Excellent.
Thank you, Eric. And we're thrilled to have you coming back to where you should have never left in the first place.
You're right.
All right, so we're going to begin some Q&A with John. You know, John, you alluded to it a little bit, but you know, your perspective over the last 25 years, you've seen a lot happen. You've seen a lot of growth and change. How has the need for lab space grown in the last few years? And you know, you mentioned Yale's pipeline. Can you tell us more about this phenomena?
We'll start off with, you know, when we first starting startups 20 plus years ago, the need for space was evident then. I mean, you have to think back to the 1990s. But at that point in time, what we now know as 300 George Street was an empty building. It was the former home of the Southern New England Telephone Company. It had been abandoned, essentially laid idle for a decade. And but there was no place if you started a biotech in New Haven outside of Science Park, which if you talk to the people who were the original Alexion people, I remember visiting them in the mid 90s in their space in building 25 at Science Park. And it was crappy space. I mean, there was water dripping from the ceilings. You could smell mold and must. It was awful, just pathetically awful. Yet Alexion was trying to get started there, and actually had their first bioreactor set up on the 5th floor or something like that. And so everybody was looking around going, well, if we're going to start these biotechs, where are we going to start them? Because, you know, even if they start, they can't stay here because there's no real place to expand. And so it really wasn't until around 1999 when we got convinced the Winstanley Enterprise Group, Carter and his father actually, that New Haven was a great place to start a company. And at that point in time, people really still didn't believe that we were actually going to do what we said we were going to do, which was promising 3 to 4 venture-backed startups a year. And it was very important that they have money, because we figured if they had money, they were sustainable. So we weren't counting promises and dreams, we were counting dollars in the bank, and as we used to say, wire transfer receipts from VCs. We actually made good on our promise. We actually ended up averaging 4 to 5 venture-backed startups a year over the next decade and a half. That actually ended up leading to companies like Arvinas and Biohaven, which are now publicly traded companies, and others as well. But in the last 5 years, in particular, the last 5, things have accelerated. We've actually doubled the number of startups over the last 5 years. We went from 5 to 10. And this year, we're already past 10, and I think there's a good shot of being 12 or 13 easily. And the amounts of money raised has accelerated as well. So these aren't little bitty companies. And Eric and I get into this little back and forth all the time because Eric discounts everything I say by, what was it, Eric? 80%? 80%, I think it was.
That's right.
I used to say 90, but now he's given me a bump. That, you know, when we're starting companies with real dollars that are going to expand fairly rapidly, which I think actually brings a warm feeling to Eric's heart when he starts looking at his spreadsheet of expenses. But the point is, these companies are demanding space. And so while we didn't have space for a while, 300 George gave us access to space, and we've been able to find others. The last 4 or 5 years, it's been really tough. And right now, with the exception of Pierce Lab, which isn't coming online quite yet, or is just starting, there hasn't really been any available lab space in New Haven for the last 18 months, which is problematic for me, because I just told you I got, 10, 12 companies coming online, and they're having a difficult time finding space. So when Carter Winstanley announced he was going to build 101 College, that became exciting, except for it's 2 years out yet. But BioLabs was one of the things that we thought was critically important, because we needed that space that people could just step into. Because I have been involved in at least 24 companies that we've raised venture capital, wanted to stay in New Haven, and then we had to actually build out space. So while Jay, Brotman, and others at Svigals have been really happy with us because that gives them a lot of business, the problem is it's always a 6-month delay. And when you raise venture capital, people want you to start spending money immediately. It's a delay. So what's happening now is we are reaching that level of maturity that people talk about when they talk about places like Kendall Square and otherwhere, where you can start a company, move into space, and be in business fairly quickly. And I am highly confident that this is not a blip on the screen. This is our new reality. I've been saying that for 2 years. I've been right for the last 2 years. I think I'm going to be right for at least one more, because I see behind that dozen companies that we have already started, either have launched or will launch before the end of this year, I see another 40 behind it, because Yale has now got a whole series of programs, not the least of which is the Blavatnik program, which is our accelerator fund internally, that is continually developing new ventures that are going to be demanding that space. So this is a relatively new phenomena, but it's our new reality.
Thank you, John. I have another question for you, but I want to also just interject. Yes, startup incubator space has been much nil in the area. And however, we also now are beginning to see for the startups that are ready to leave their incubator when some graduation space coming up. So we do have Twining's development at Winchester. We have oh my God, 55 Church Street development. So that's exciting. While the 101.
Well, we need both. We need both.
I mean, absolutely.
if we're doing, we are right now averaging one initial public offering per year. And every one of those IPOs means a super expansion. And so I know that Arvinas has already announced that they're going to be in the 101 college, but they're also working with Twining and Science Park to get them immediate space.
Right.
So we need both. It's not one or the other, it's both.
We need all of the above. The pipeline is critical. So John, another question for you. So with your startups, why do these startups want to be so close to Yale? Why can't they go anywhere in Connecticut to start up?
Well, that's a softball question, because faculty want to be able to both be at their company and be in their lab. They have to be, most labs at Yale run 24/7. So people have to be in both places. They can't be taking time off to go to Boston or San Francisco or wherever that other place is even. So the less likely they are to get in their car and drive, the more likely they are to be wanting space close by. And so the fact of the matter is, most faculty members want to be able to be in their lab, say at noontime, walk over to the company, at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, walk back over to the company again, so that they can drop in and out all the time. And so proximity is key. It's like retail, location, location, location. And the location closest to Yale is viewed as being the best. Funny story, when we first started doing this, people thought 300 George Street was too far away. Seriously, they thought 300 George Street, which is all of 3 blocks. I actually had the first faculty member who we were starting a company with was Dave Ward and genetics, and the company was molecular staging. And the company, I said, let's just walk over there. It took 5 minutes to walk there. And after we walked there, that's not as bad as I thought. But the problem is I have animals that I have to work with. And so the problem they have is, they can come up with lots of different reasons, but proximity is the first one. And so the closer it is, the better.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Well, now I'm going to ask Paul a question, because now you've got somebody who has a incubator and yours is up at UCONN. And could you give us a little background on how TIP was developed and the kind of companies that you have? You're muted. You're muted, Paul. You're muted, Paul.
Okay.
There you go.
Let me, I wasn't allowed to unmute. The TIP program started in 2003. We had about 3,000 square feet in stores. We had 5 labs and about 6 offices. It has since grown to about over 35,000 square feet, with about 44 labs and about 65 offices, some dedicated desks and co-working space. We currently have 3 locations in Stores, Farmington, and Stanford, which is Stanford is basically on digital sciences. We built the building in Farmington, an extension in Farmington in 2016 with about 25,000 square feet. I was figuring it was going to take, and that had 32 labs and 40 offices. I was figuring it was going to take about 4 or 5 years to fill. We filled it almost up in 2 years. The need for space, lab space, is something that I wasn't aware it was that big. And now, as companies get ready to graduate, the problem they're having is finding other space. So we always tell them, plan out at least 12 to 18 months to both find a location that's comparable, that's good for you, and it gives you enough time to get it refitted to your needs. The type of companies we have in the program are anything technology-based. So we have life science, material science, digital science, energy, and a wide range of other areas. The makeup of the companies, I mean, it is the University of Connecticut Technology Incubation Program, but the makeup is we have about 20% are faculty-started companies, about 14 to 15% are student-started companies, about 3 to 5% are alumni companies, and about 60% are companies coming from the outside. When we get a company comes from the outside, we try to have some type of collaboration with the university. What else? Our success rate is about 60%, and about 70% of those companies that are successful end up staying in the state of Connecticut. So we have a pretty good thing. And the problem, like I said, is finding space. So a number of our companies have moved down to Brantford from Farmington. We've had some to Shelton, few are staying in the Farmington area when they can find space. But that's the biggest problem we're facing right now. Dawn, you're on mute.
My turn. Okay, thank you so much, Paul. Kim, so similar, would you please give some background on the Commons Incubator and how it is managed, please? You're muted, and somebody needs to unmute Kim. There you go.
There we go. Yes, so similarly to TIP, we opened in summer of 2016 out in Groton. The space came about out here because the building was donated to BioCT, back then Cure, from Pfizer. So it's former Pfizer lab space. We did renovations with a grant from the DECD to bring it up to modern day. We have 13 labs out here, 18 offices and co-working space and shared spaces, shared laboratory resources, equipment rooms, and conference rooms and such. Like Paul said, we did fill up very quickly. It took about a year and a half for us to fill up and be self-sustainable, no longer receiving any money from the state. We currently have 14 science and technology-based companies at the facility. Because we are in Groton, we have a wide variety of types of companies from med device, biopharmaceuticals, and energy too. So it's a nice mix of entrepreneurs. Sometimes being an entrepreneur, you can feel kind of lonely. And being in an incubator space, you have other like-minded people that you can collaborate with and sometimes commiserate with and be together.
Terrific. Can you give us a little insight on the New Haven Innovation Labs at Pierce and what the status of that is?
Sure. So BioCT will be helping Pierce Labs to manage the facility. Right now we're in construction with our architects, our Svigals. I saw on the call also Babbage, our builders, are on here, and AKF are the engineers. So we'll be opening the first week of November for tenants to move in. And we're very excited because everybody that visits the building, like John said, they look out the window and they're like, oh, there's my lab, or there's my apartment right there. So they really like that walkability and being so close to their lab space. Another benefit of the Pierce Labs, I believe John spoke to this a little bit, is access to animal facility. So Pierce has that capability for companies to use their animal facility, and also they can use Yale core facilities as well.
Thank you, Kim. And I just want to make note, you know, the reason BioCT is involved in these incubators, again, starting off with Groton, we had this phenomenal opportunity, and the market, our industry desperately needed space, even though it was so far from New Haven. And anyways, it was a very successful, is a successful operation. And with 101 coming on, but taking a couple of years for it to come to fruition, as Jon has said, we desperately need space. And Pierce really came to the industry and said, you know what, we have extra room. We are more than willing to help this community and get some incubators started, you know, waiting for 101, et cetera. And that's where BioCT and Kim's expertise got involved. So, you know, at the end of the day, BioCT will do whatever we have to help our community continue to grow. So with that, I'd like to pass this to Eric. And again, Eric, you know, BioLabs is new to this area. You've already mentioned a little bit about it, but please let us know, how did you come to get involved with the 101 project? And please tell us more about what you're going to be bringing to the table.
Sure. So again, the concept behind BioLabs is very much focused on the issues that Jon identified earlier. It's all about efficiency. So the whole concept is to help these innovators very time efficiently and capital efficiently get to proof of concept as rapidly as possible. And we do that by renting benches, 6-foot benches on a month-to-month basis. So we like to say easy in, easy out in our model, very little out-of-pocket costs, moving into a fully fit out lab with world-class laboratory equipment that's available basically for a monthly charge. And we find that by making the resources at a BioLabs facility available to these innovators, they're able to very quickly and very efficiently pursue an idea and get to proof of concept quickly, and then get teed up for their first institutional financing. And we essentially break the back of the problem that a lot of these innovators face of, well, how do you get data where you need money, and how do you get money, you need data? And we fundamentally break that down into little steps. So a lot of these innovators can start their company on a credit card and do that in less than a week or two. It's really that phenomenal. And by lowering the barriers to innovation, we've increased the supply of innovation across the network. And it's really been an interesting experiment as we brought this model online. So we brought a BioLab concept to Durham, North Carolina back in 2017, really as the first ecosystem to focus on with a co-working model that had been shown to be very successful in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But we all know there's only one Cambridge. And the bet we made in Durham, North Carolina back in 2017 was, again, very similar to what Jon was talking about earlier. We bet that we could start one biotech company per month for at least 3 years and have the normal attrition and graduation to really make the concept of a biolab work in downtown Durham. And we've been wildly successful in that experiment. It turns out that the developer in Durham is a developer called Ventas, who's very well known to Carter Winstanley and is well known in the New Haven ecosystem. And of course, these universities do talk to each other. And I think the local universities in North Carolina are thrilled with the success we've had with the BioLab model, both at Duke and with UNC. So Yale certainly heard about that success. Carter Winstanley heard about the success through Ventas, and he approached us about 1.5 years ago to see if the BioLab model would fit with his vision of 101 College. And it really has been a very easy conversation with Carter and his team, with Yale and Mike Crair and his team, obviously with the state of Connecticut, a lot of aligned interests here. And of course, you know, my personal affection for the area certainly doesn't hurt. And it's very exciting. I have to tell you, we open up these labs quite regularly. We have a really good understanding of what it takes to be successful in an ecosystem. And the potential going on in New Haven is truly phenomenal when it comes to the quality of the research, the quality of the innovators, the support coming from the network, from the state, the people on this phone call. It really has a lot of what we call the substrate required to build a successful ecosystem. And the BioLab model is part of that solution. It's not the only part of the solution, it's part of the solution. And bringing the infrastructure, and of course we have the major pharma network wrapped around the whole network. We just feel like this is an idea whose time has come, and we're very eager to get this model online as rapidly as possible and begin working with the key innovators who we hope are going to fill it up.
Thank you, Eric. We certainly feel the same way. So thank you all of you for getting this started. So I just want to open up the questions. And, you know, historically, people use the term incubator for any kind of space that's out there just to start a lab. And we all know there's a major difference between an incubator that is managed and just four walls in a lab that's being leased to a startup company. So I'll just open it up, whoever would like, but can you kind of help us differentiate the what you get in a managed incubator versus what you're going to do if you're just renting some space?
I'll start. In a managed in our incubator anyway, and I think most of them are this way. We have a lot of programs going on. So we have mentorship. We have entrepreneurs in resident. So we assign each company an entrepreneur in resident, and we encourage them to talk to all of them because they all have different backgrounds. You also have educational and networking events. We have investor pitch opportunities. At UCONN, we have a summer fellowship program where you get to use a UCONN student for 10 weeks to help move your research forward. You have access to EH&S, environmental health and safety. You have access to core facilities. We have access to, in our incubator, we have animal facilities. We also have access to the university library. We have business service providers and vendor discounts. And you also have access to University of Connecticut faculty, which is a top 25 public research university. So there's a lot of programs that go on above and beyond what you normally pay for rent. And I'm sure most of the other incubators and other places have a lot of programs as well. But those are some of the ones that we have at UCONN.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to add? Oh, Kelly, could somebody unmute? Yeah, thank you. Okay, Kim.
Thank you. A lot of what we've heard from companies that come through the incubator too is that turnkey capability to move into a space. So just being able to finally I have a little bit of money, I need to do some proof of concept work, I just want to move in and start working. And then when companies graduate on the other side, they're like, I didn't realize how much work it is building out my own space, or just ordering things that and things that we take care of in the incubator. So managing and maintaining all the equipment and the HVAC systems and hoods, and if your sink gets clogged, we take care of those kinds of things. We really allow people to hit the ground running and start doing their science right away. And that's really important when people are first starting.
So most first-time entrepreneurs or faculty who haven't started a company before don't understand all the things that have to be done to start a business. I mean, the lab space part is they're so used to just walking in and saying, okay, this is the lab, it's all fitted out, I can go to work, because that's what universities do. We provide benches that are fully fitted. And if it needs some renovation, we take care of that before you even show up. So the idea of walking into a space and saying, okay, it's empty, it's four walls, but I've got to get benches. I've got to get gas, water, air to that bench. I've got to then have an environmental protection plan. I've got to figure out how to deal with waste. I've got to get equipment to bench. Oh, and on top of that, I got to do HR, IT, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot to be done. So the idea that you could actually walk in, there's a bench, I can start doing science, is much more. We just have not had that capability in Connecticut for the longest time, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why we tend to raise so much money. Is a lot of that goes to paying for that kind of work for building out labs. So this, I fully believe that we're at a time when we can accelerate the number of startups by adding this capability. And it is yes, is it an earlier stage? Sure is, because what Eric and Kim and others Paula is talking about is the ability to go in and try it out and see if this is actually something I can go raise money around. We haven't had that capability before. So this is truly, I think, an opportunity to accelerate what we've already seen is a very robust community.
So since we're talking about an empty four walls, get your lab started versus an incubator, walk in and start doing your science, Could somebody help folks understand? I mean, because this is somewhat new in this area, some people are in sticker shock. Some people are like, oh my God, so, there's, you hear $15 a square foot, you hear $40 a square foot. Of course, all of that is much less than you're going to hear in Cambridge and other areas that have been, established. But, help us understand what you're going to pay for when you walk in and feel, oh my God, sticker shock. Kind of basically what Jon was just talking about. What is, anyways, I'll stop there.
So I'm happy to take a stab at that, Dawn, if you'd like. So with the BioLab model, we find that the resident companies that really benefit from the model don't fall into the trap of thinking about cost per square foot of rentable lab space. And I'm not minimizing the fact that they have to watch their costs, and that obviously is a logical question to ask, but the folks that really understand the BioLab model take into the calculus the importance of speed. And what we really offer in BioLabs is the ability for companies to get very quickly to proof points and then to move past them into bigger financings and ultimately into graduation space. And that really, frankly, is priceless in the venture world that we are focused on getting venture quality companies launched as rapidly as possible. We, as Paul and Kim had alluded to earlier, we offer these support services that really allow the scientists to focus on what they're good at, driving the science. So we keep the boxes running 24/7. We have a lot of support services. Ultimately, we can connect them to pharma, and that's valuable. So by renting a bench on a month-to-month basis, we get these companies focused on what it costs them to get their proof points and how fast they can get there. And that is a better way to think about the BioLab model as opposed to, as I said, thinking about cost per square foot.
In the same vein, what should folks be looking at or be aware of? How's that? When you're looking at space that's in a building that was built to spec, built for labs, with labs in mind, versus buildings that were offices, warehouses, whatever, and are being converted to labs. What would you recommend to a tenant to really make sure is available in those other types of lab spaces?
Well, first, there are two things. The first two things that they actually absolutely positively have to think about is overhead space, because labs tend to have high ceilings. But probably the single most important thing, well, actually two most important things, HVAC, the quality of HVAC and backup power, because a lab always has freezers and other things that need to have power 24/7 and cannot have any downtime, because you lose experiments by doing that. And experiments are money and time, and you can't go without. So overhead space or high ceilings, HVAC quality, be able to do the required number of air turns, and backup power are the top three things that people have to think about, which typically don't exist in just commercial Class A office space.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if anyone on the phone is contemplating going into a retrofit situation where there was a previous tenant or there has been a history of previous tenants, I would be very careful about environmental remediation, any liability, what previous work was going on the site, what was going on under the ground, and just make sure you really go in eyes wide open.
That's an excellent point, Eric. Having been there and had that happen, not a pretty site, and it costs you a lot more money and a lot more time.
Exactly.
So there's, the three incubators that are being discussed, in general, the idea of programming and such is similar. However, there are differences. And when it comes to turnaround of the startup company, Eric mentioned somebody come in for a month and they're gone, et cetera. And, what, I guess if you look at the explosion and in Cambridge, what does the typical turnaround look like when a startup is going to come in and sit down in an incubator? Are they told you've got 60 minutes, you've got 3 months, you've got 1 year, or what kind of conversations happen based on the various incubators that we have here?
Well, at TIP, we normally will have an application process. If they get by that and they get approved to the program, we normally sign a 3-year lease. And now in that lease, there's a clause that there's a 60-day out by the university and a 60-day out by the company. The university very rarely ever used it. Companies use it all the time. If they get acquired, they run out of money, they need more space, they have to move out, so they can use that. On average, our companies have been staying for a little over 3 years. We've had some companies, stay 6 months. We've had other companies that have been there for 10 years. If you're working on a life science project, it takes much longer, especially if you have to get clinical trials and things like that. So we try to remain flexible. So like I said, we sign a 3-year lease most of the time, and as always, we've done an annual extensions if they're making progress to what they've said they were going to do.
Paul, Kim?
Likewise, out here in Groton and soon to be at Pierce, we have an application process. Once the company is approved, bench space, we do 6-month leases with renewable terms, and private spaces, 1-year leases with renewable terms. And that allows the companies to come in and try their practices. Will we make it or will we not? And that way they can either succeed or fail without a giant commitment of a 5-year lease of a commercial space. That flexibility is really important for the early companies.
Okay, great. So, Jon, you've talked a lot about how important it is for the Yale startups to be right next to the university. I'd like to talk about, what's happening a little bit more in the Stamford area and the growth that's happening there, the Branford area, and, what those spaces are like and what they offer. So Paul, if you could, talk more about, UCONN's work being done in the Stamford area and the types of companies that typically will choose that space.
Well, the Stanford area, that's more digital sciences. So the facility we just opened up is about 5,500 square feet. It's just offices, co-working desks, and dedicated desks. So there's no labs per se down there.
Okay, good to know. And there's no one here. If anybody wants to raise their hand about talking about Branford, that's fine. There is no incubator space per se. There isn't any incubator space in Branford.
But a lot of startups have, and I can think of a half dozen off the top of my head, have gone to Branford simply because there was no other space available. But they've had to go through a lot of retrofit, basically tear out and rebuild. So it's not, where you can plug and play, where you just walk in and get started most of the time.
Yeah.
And so that's, but there has been space, but right now that's all filled up too.
Yeah. So the definition of incubator that we've talked about, there is nothing like that in Branford. There is lab space. There is, smaller 800 square foot rooms, et cetera. And, that is a lot of space that has been converted. And there's some developers down there that have really worked hard to try to bring, labs to spec down there. And I believe the next panel is going to have the developers talk about the space that they've been working on. So
the companies from Yale that have gone to Branford have primarily been ones who have raised significant amount of money. So they can afford to, hire people to do the fit out for them. But it is costly and it takes time off it that is delaying the startup of their science.
Right. Besides getting in proof of concept, moving on, seeing if you're successful or not, what else should these companies be looking for, thinking about? I mean, what I hear that companies get in and within 8 months, they've grown out of the space and they need to go elsewhere. So how should they be looking at the bigger picture?
Well, I'm going to jump in here, sorry. We typically talk about looking at a 3-year funding horizon, 24 to 36 months. But, you know, because when we're raising money, you're usually raising money for 18 to 24, but you have to think about, okay, if we're successful, where you go. And that's actually becomes part of the problem, which is if you build out a space, and let's just say it's 2,500 square feet to get started because you've raised $5 million, but you think you're going to raise, 20 more on top of that. You have to think about, well, where am I going to go? And you can't afford to be investing a lot of dollars in a space that you're going to abandon because you can't take it with you. There's nowhere to port that with you. And so that's money that's essentially not recoupable for the startup. So the idea of having the ability to both incubate and then graduate is always got to be top of your mind, because you got to be thinking about success and how it's going to work out. Most companies, where they start is where they want to stay, because they want to expand. If you take a company like Arvinas, it started with 2,500, and I think now in Science Park it has 65,000 square feet, and it's getting ready to build another 50 next door to it. So it's just, it becomes, you need, when you're doing your science, you need to have all the people in the same place, and you can't be spread out across multiple sites, and you don't like to abandon sites that you've invested a lot of time and energy building out.
Let me pick up on an important point that Jon just made that we've discovered now watching the BioLab network unfold over the last couple of years. So he talked about the capital efficiency and the need to think about, do you invest in infrastructure? Do you invest in science? And then the BioLab model, as I said, it is such a capital efficient model. We see that companies can go about 5 times further on a dollar because a lot of the equipment is already available to them. And it's caused something very interesting to happen in the network. And we have seen repeatedly now some really well-known innovators who have walked away from some very large venture financing proposals. And the usual suspects that come in and offer a $50 million Series A financing. But they've walked away from those proposals because they didn't need to raise that much money in this capital efficient model which they were living in. And they could get just as far on $5 or $10 million with a different set of investors. And it's been really interesting to watch because that allows them to maintain control if they wish to. It's an optionality that allows them to stay in control of their company longer in this model. And to Jon's point, they can think about, when do they want to graduate? When do they want to engage in partnering discussions with big pharma, and really have that under their control as opposed to somebody else's? And I think that it's a very relevant topic given this pipeline of companies that Jon talked about that are filling up the queue here, thinking about either raising venture dollars or getting ready to do an IPO.
Capital efficiency is the name of the game.
Yeah, completely agree.
And it doesn't matter if there's a wonderful capital fundraising environment or a bad one. Capital, use of capital is always trying to be the most efficient. And that's why I think incubators are going to change the game for us, because they don't have to spend their money there.
And the ability to focus on the science is extraordinary to watch. And for us, again, the proof is in the pudding, where many of the graduates who are ready to go from our network and step outside after 18 to 24 months, they're actually requesting to stay part of our community, because we do what Kelly was alluding to earlier. We maintain the boxes for them. We take care of all the stuff that they don't want to be part of, and allows them to continue to drive science. So they're actually coming to us to find ways to stay connected to us as they graduate.
Speaking of that connection, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jon.
Nope, go ahead.
Speaking of that connection, as we do develop these incubators and this community, BioCT will be working with, excuse me, Kim, and I'm sure BioLabs in time, but Kim's going to be starting a monthly incubator cafe series, where all the tenants from all the incubators in Connecticut can get together on a monthly basis, get keynote speakers or best practices to share with each other, et cetera. But again, to continue to build on what Eric said and build that community to help them, stay here. They're going to want to stay here because they're going to meet a lot of other people that are doing tremendous things. A question from the audience. You guys have mentioned applications. If someone was to fill out an application today, how long does it take till they get approved to get into the incubator? And then how much time should they allow to begin to think about graduation?
Well, for TIP, if we get an application today, we need to set up, if that gets approved, it gets reviewed by a number of people. If that gets approved, then we need to set up a interview for them to come in, and that usually takes about a month. So I would say on average about two months when you first apply to get in. And once you get approved from the interview, we can turn around a lease within a couple of days, so we can get you in rather quickly. And as far as, like I said, we sign 3-year leases for our labs, but there's a 60-day out by the university and a 60-day out by the company. So there's a lot of flexibility on that as well.
Thank you, Kim.
Out in Groton, we can turn around an application in about 2 days. It usually takes about a month for somebody to go from application process to getting into the space. That is mostly because they all have to have insurance before they come in. So they have to work with their insurance company, and we have to get a copy of their certificate of insurance. That is generally what takes the longest for us.
Okay. And Eric, what's your process going to look like?
Yeah, so every site is different, but in general, we typically have what we call a selection committee the first week of every month. We try to have on the order of 3 to 5 companies present at that selection committee, because it's a fairly simple 15-20 minute non-confidential presentation explaining what the science is all about and how the company would envision benefiting from some of the resources we can offer to them. We're obviously trying to create scientific diversity in the sites and try to find companies that really understand the benefit and the power of the model. Typically, if a company wants to be part of the network, they are able to be part of the network. And I think in general, from the point they contact us to the point they can move in is typically just over a month or so.
Great. From what I'm hearing and seeing, these, you've got TIP in Farmington, Innovation Commons in Groton, and then you've got BioLabs Pierce right in the heart of New Haven. And you've got the company spinning out of Yale coming out in New Haven. So I'm bringing this up because I think the tenure of people staying in an incubator you're going to see is going to be very different in New Haven, where you've got companies beating at the door, they're coming out of Yale, you've got 40 coming down the road. I think the turnaround is going to be a lot quicker than Groton and Farmington, where you're, have a different cycle that's going on in those areas. Excuse me. Do any of you have anything you would like to interject that we have not touched on that you feel is important? Again, our target audience right now is somebody new trying to figure out how to get into a lab. They've got a little money. What should they do? Where should they go? How should they do it? What should they be thinking about? So I know we've touched base on a lot of it, but is there anything that we've blatantly missed here? And audience, please fill in your questions.
Eric, I think you need to talk a little bit about bringing in partners, particularly pharma biotech partners that can be exposed to the startups in the incubator space. Because one of the key things is you're creating a community of ventures in the space, and having visibility or access to potential corporate partners or even venture partners is a critical aspect of success.
Sure, I probably didn't mention this in great detail as I should have earlier on. So around the BioLab network we talked about with 16 labs and close to 400 companies in the network, We have also wrapped around virtually every single major pharma company as a sponsor of the network. And they, of course, are eager to be treated as residents of the network, which allows them to basically walk the hallways of the labs and get to meet the innovators who are working on areas of interest and to start to forge those relationships earlier. They can lead to partnering, or in some cases can lead to outright acquisitions. Obviously, it all begins with the people. So as those pharma companies interface with us, we have access to the heads of R&D, the heads of business development, many of the therapeutic area heads interface with both the BioLabs, but also people in the BioLab network. And obviously that's a very important resource for knowledge and for capital and for potentially longer term distribution. So the companies in our network will ultimately almost certainly be acquired in some way by big pharma, and the BioLab model helps to facilitate those interactions and get them to happen earlier.
And I'd also like to interject, when you're in an incubator space, again, they've mentioned, the programs that are available, the partnerships that can be created, so because you're not completely on your own somewhere. Another thing that BioCT offers to these incubators is a program where if the incubator is a member of BioCT, all of their tenants get access to our discount and savings programs that we offer our members. So it's the New England Edge program. And so the value of an incubator is their shared equipment. You don't have to buy every single thing, and we'll get into that in a moment. But when you do need to buy equipment, you do need to buy supplies, etc. Going through the New England Edge program will save you a tremendous amount of money and stretch those dollars as you're proving your concept. So could anybody talk about the shared equipment? What is actually shared in your labs? What can a tenant expect to have to get on their own versus what is available in the facility that's being shared? Would anybody like to talk about that? Kim?
Sure. So since Groton is up and running, I'll talk about Groton. So out in Groton, there's everything from a freezer fridge farm to a stem and tissue culture laboratory, which is shared. And stem and tissue culture laboratory, there's BioCT cabinets and CO2 water jacket incubator and the things that you need to do that type of work. What's nice about those spaces is you're not paying to maintain that equipment. You're not paying to buy that equipment. You're not paying for the footprint either. So you go in, you use it, and then you leave and go back to your space. There's also other small equipment, of course, like ice and small benchtop equipment. We also have a library where you can take out things like vortexes and stir plates and smaller things that people kind of forget about when they're in the middle of experiments. Also, all of the chemical fume hoods are calibrated and maintained. There's one in every laboratory. And exit, there's also DI water, RO water, all those kinds of things, that vacuum and such.
And I don't, which of your incubators have vivarium access? Because people would like to know, how does that work when you're in an incubator and you're sharing a vivarium? And do they typically, is husbandry taken care of? Are they on their own? How do they pay for animal work?
UCONN has, we have a vivarium in Farmington. We also have one at Stores. They have access to it 24/7. The university takes care of the animals. They have separate rooms where they can do their experiments from where they keep the animals, and they pay for it on a per animal basis. They have to get approved by the university for their experiments before they can start utilizing that, and they have to be properly trained.
Thank you. Go ahead, Kim.
And Pierce also has a incubator available. I'm sorry. New Haven Innovation Labs in the Pierce building has an incubator available. Their
I
private
mean,
room-
animal facility.
Yes, thank you. Oh my God. And so that's available for the companies that are in the incubator. Their private rooms pay for the room and then a per diem cost to handle the animals. Everything is taken care of from the IECO panel to protocol review to veterinarians to the husbandry.
Someone's asking, what is the typical downtime between tenants in a space and how much remodeling needs to be done? I'm not quite clear what they're asking. I guess when somebody moves out of one of the labs in an incubator, how much time does it take for that space to be ready again for another tenant?
It doesn't take long. I mean, because all they have to do is make sure it gets cleaned. If the tenant's been following all the regulations for EH&S, so it's just a matter of cleaning the lab up, getting it ready. It can be less than a month. The remodeling, it all depends on what they want done.
Okay.
I
Super.
agree. It's very quick. Usually folks that come in an incubator type scenario, they may just want an outlet, electrical outlet on a different wall or something as simple as that. And that can be done in a week or two.
You know, I'm thinking about the times Kim up in Groton, you know, when you've got the heat of the summer, the cold of the winter, the tornadoes, the storms. I mean, you know, so much goes on, and these tenants basically are sheltered in their labs doing their lab work while you and managers are running around dealing with, you know, the heat, something went wrong with the HVAC, something's gone wrong with this and that, and it's always going to happen. And so the value of an incubator is the tenant is not spending its time running around like a chicken with their head cut off while they're still trying to manage their science. Anybody want to elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, it's true. We take care of those things for the people in the incubator. I've been on the other side at a startup where we took care of all those things. And generally you need to have, depending on the size of your space, at least an FTE. That is your facilities manager, possibly a lab manager, to be running around and taking care of things when there's storms or just regular maintenance. And it's just easy in the incubator environment that you don't have to do that.
Right. And, you know, teeing up for the next panel session, you know, once you leave the confines of this incubator, as Jon said, you're used to a university environment, you got all your lab stuff there, you go to an incubator where it's similar, hopefully, so that you can keep running. And then at some point, you've got to think about, as you're being successful, you know, oh my God, where am I going to go from here? So, you know, in New Haven, we've got you as the tenant needs to be thinking about graduation, and we'll get into that a lot more in the next panel series. But we also have an ecosystem that needs to prepare and key up for that graduation as well. So I mentioned earlier that we have Alex Twining's property, we have Hurley's property that is working right now as we speak and creating some graduation space, you know, maybe 5,000 square foot footprints and more. However, we need more. Is there anything you guys can tell the developers that might be in our audience, townspeople that might be in our audience? What do we need from them to try to help them understand what it takes to build out these labs and how much support that the towns need to give for this? Or we can save that question for the next group, which is going to have developers and contractors and such on the panel.
I just know from being in this business for 8 years, having seen the number of companies grow from like 23 when I started. Right now we have 62. But when companies get ready to graduate, because they're running out of space, or their sales are too high, then we ask them to find another space. But we consciously give them like 12 to 18 months to find that space and to get it refitted. There just isn't enough space around, especially lab space is very difficult to find, especially as companies are expanding from a 1,000-foot lab to then all of a sudden they need 3,000 square feet. There's not that much space in the state of Connecticut that has that. I think if companies are building that, and I think Eric will find out when he builds his, that they're going to, that the starting companies are going to go out that, but then he's going to face the problem is where do they go from there?
I completely agree with that. I was reflecting on what John had mentioned earlier. There's been a sea change in this country about how biotech companies are getting started, and the BioLab model is said part of that change. But the other thing that's going on, I think, in the COVID era is that we've all seen how opportunistic it is and how easy it is to work remotely. And I think this is really going to break in New Haven's favor vis-a-vis Cambridge and vis-a-vis New York City. So given the substrate, the quality of the substrate in the New Haven ecosystem, given the infrastructure coming together now, I predict that within 2 years, the companies moving into one-on-one college are going to be rapidly looking for graduation space, and they're going to want to stay in New Haven. And I would start building, at least building that graduation roadmap, like right now, to be ready for the inevitable parade of graduate companies that will want to stay in the New Haven ecosystem.
So this is the issue. Eric just nailed it. This is the issue that we've been having, is everybody waits until we need it to start thinking about how we're going to build it. Well, that's 2 years too late. And that's why I started 2 years ago saying, this is what's going to happen, folks. And we reached it. And the problem is that if we don't start doing something today, because of the time lag that it takes to actually build, I mean, Carter's not going to be online until early 2024 right now. It's just, we're constantly building companies, they're growing companies in that space of time. And in fact, what we're seeing is those companies that can't find space today, expansion space today, are thinking, well, okay, let's, there's space in Boston, let's go up there. Yeah, it's going to cost us, but at least there's space. And this is the constant tension we have. If we don't have space for these companies to graduate into, they will go somewhere else, because they're being, if they're graduating, it means they're being successful. They're successful technologically, they're successful fundraising, et cetera, and they can't stop. They can't wait. And that's the problem we have. I feel like I'm running around. If I had hair, I'd be running around with my hair on fire. But I'm just saying, it is what it is. And I just don't think people understand that this is a very dynamic marketplace that is growing very fast right now. And if we don't capture this is lightning in a bottle, folks. If we don't capture this, it's to the state's detriment. It really is, because the reality, this is the new reality. We are growing companies. They are successful. They want to stay here. And if they don't find space here, then that's our loss, because the companies are going to go off and succeed. It just is.
Well, I'm going to add, John, to that, a typical cycle in our industry is, hundreds of companies start and hundreds of companies fail. There's a lot of turnover. I have to say that in New Haven right now, we have had a tremendous success rate.
Right.
I am not aware of a company that has shut down due to, they ran out of money or they failed their idea in a couple of years. I mean, we are really in a phenomenal, but you're right. We need to be ready for it.
Well, some companies don't succeed as well as we had hoped. Okay, so it's inevitable. But our hit rate, our success rate is much higher. I mean, you can talk to Eric, and he's got North Carolina. He's also got Cambridge to look at. Our success rate is much higher than our competing comparables. It just is. I mean, we have a much higher success rate. And so, yes, will some fail? Yeah, but from a developer space standpoint, so what? There's lots of people right behind it to take that space.
Right.
I mean, we have waiting line lists right now. That's the problem. And so, sure, some might, but our success rate has been very high. I think it will continue to be very high. But I also see the backlog. I mean, we constantly have about 35 to 40 companies that are coming out of Yale science that are in some stage of development, of which, we are able to raise money for, significant money for 10 to 12 of those a year. But Eric's actually, and I think Kim as well, are looking for ones that are even earlier than that. So I think that's just going to make the population that much bigger. I could see us going from 10 to 12 to 20 plus venture-backed startups a year with the addition of the incubator spaces.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another audience question. How does one determine what services are incorporated into ceiling panels, lab bench setups while building out an incubator space? I guess this is someone who's not looking to go into an incubator that already has this. So, what kind of things do they need to be thinking about? Power, backup, etc., if they're going to build their own lab. Or this is also something that could be carried over to the next panel. So come back to the next panel for sure.
Eric's doing that right now for figuring out New Haven.
A lot of it honestly is money. I mean, how much money does the incubator have?
Or
to
the
put
person,
into
the tenant, the
renovation?
person. Yeah.
Yeah, or the person. Running lines to every single bench isn't a small cost. And it has to be weighed against what do people in industry actually do nowadays. Do they all need vacuum? Do they all need compressed gas? Do they all need higher electricity at every single bench? You have to figure those kinds of things out and weigh them.
Someone's asking, what should I be doing internally to understand my needs before I apply to the incubator? So what questions does your application typically ask? I guess maybe that's it. So they know what it's going to be like for them. What do they need to know ahead of time?
So the applications for both BioCT in Groton and New Haven Innovation Labs in New Haven are online. So you can read the application and see if you can answer the majority of the questions. We don't want any confidential information on the applications. You can share your non-confidential pitch deck and CVs. Try to make it as easy as possible for you to apply. So I would suggest reading those to see what you need to pull together.
The TIP application is online as well. Basically, what we're looking for is, what is your science? How big is the market? Do you have some money to support yourself over the course of a couple of years? Why do you want to be part of TIP? So those are the basic questions. I mean,
Yeah.
right now, I said before that we were 95% full. I always like to be around 80%, so we have room for companies to expand. And if we find those other companies that are looking for space, we have space for them to come in, that would be successful. Our normal company will come in with like taking one small lab and maybe one office. And then by the time they leave, they'll have 3 or 4 labs and a couple of offices. So we like to have that space so they can expand. Because if it's a good company, they're going to expand rapidly. And if I don't want them in there for 6 months and then they have to leave because we're out of space.
Great. I think one thing we should help the audience know is that when you come into an incubator, as you've already heard, TIP, you sign a 3-year. Groton or Pierce, you sign a 1-year. Eric, you said yours is month to month. However, in that, there are quarterly, semi-annual, annual business reviews with your tenants to make sure that they are on target. Are they, a year later, are they still what they were doing in the first 30 days? Because, you want, depending upon demand, you're going to want people to turn. and help them when they're ready to move, help them understand, who they need to get involved with. We'll talk again about this in the next panel. Have any of you had to ask a tenant to leave who was in a situation of not really growing?
Well, I told you before that at TIP, there's a 60-day out for the companies and a 60-day out for the university. Since 2003, the university has used it 5 times. Twice companies went bankrupt. Twice they weren't utilizing the space, and once they switched from a hydroponics company to a distributor of light company. And we've asked those companies to leave. Other than that, we've never asked a company to leave unless they're running out of space or they're making more money than they should be as part of an incubator. And then we help them move on.
Yeah, I mean, Kim can talk more to this, but I think we've had just the opposite in Groton. We had a company come in who took a lab, and then over time, it just worked out that we found, I'll let Kim, I'll let you talk about, but we found closet space, different spaces for them to grow because they were just growing so rapidly, and we tried to help them stay in the space. Kim, you want to elaborate at all?
Sure. For those years, we joke and say that we're at 110% occupancy. That's because we converted closets that were essentially equipment rooms into usable storage GMP spaces. We converted the basement into a stability chamber room. We tried our best to be able to do all of their needs to keep them in Connecticut because there was nowhere else for them to go at that point. They didn't have another space that they can move in and still do their science. So we tried really hard.
You did a phenomenal job. Thank you. So we're getting close towards the end. We got about 10 more minutes. Do any of the panelists want to say anything? And the audience can still throw a question in, but I just wanted to first of all thank the panelists. Thank you so much for being here and helping to share all of your expertise. And Jon, I'm just going to say thank you for your tenure at Yale. And we know you're retiring at the end of the year, and we also know you're going to still be you'll still be working with us in some capacity. So and attendees, thank you very much for coming. We hope that you're walking away with some value and things that you've learned. Svigals, thank you for your partnership in this. And I just wanted to remind folks there's 2 other panels if you have to sign up for each of them individually. So the next panel is designing your lab for maximum ROI. So you're ready to graduate from the incubator. What do you need to do? That's October 12th at 8:30 to 10. And then the last panel in the series is lab space life cycle and lessons learned. So this will be from industry themselves, from folks just like you who have done the entire startup up through graduation, and lessons they wish they would have known ahead of time that they will share with you. October 26th, 8:30 to 10. Anything else anybody wants to touch base on?
Yeah, I would say if you're looking for an incubator, a couple of things you should keep in mind. 1 is location, 2 is cost, 3 is services, and 4, look at the companies that are currently in the program. See if there's some people there that you can learn stuff from, or you can become partners with or collaborate with. I think that's very important because it's a great networking opportunity if you're in the right incubator.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Yep.
Dawn, could I just add that
Please.
if folks are looking for an incubator right away in New Haven, Pierce will be opening in first week of November. There are still benches available. And then out in Groton, we have 2 private labs available.
Great.
The thing about the TIP, we have all private labs. We don't have any co-working labs or benches, so everybody gets their own space. We don't have the full facilities that Eric's going to have at his with all the equipment, So there's benefits to both. So I think you need to take a look at what's better for you, and the cost constraints on all in versus you have to build it yourself somewhat.
Right. So thank you. And Eric, we're really very excited to see what BioLabs is going to bring to our ecosystem.
Likewise.
And pardon?
Likewise.
And then just reminding everyone, this has been recorded. So if you would like to see the recording or let someone know their recording is here, you will all who have registered will get a copy of the recording, and it will be hosted in the BioCT website library. So thank you all very, very much for coming today. Appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Why, thank you.